I'd like to introduce JP Villanueva. He currently works as a trust and security engineer with BugCrowd. Before that, he was an application security engineer. Before that, he's the solution architect over at White Hat Security. He's been a regular speaker all over the place. So at Black Hat Arsenal, at DEF CON, as well as a bunch of just local OWASP chapters. He's a great speaker. Please help me in welcoming JP Villanueva.
Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? Perfect. Cool. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to talk about Hunt, data-driven web hacking and manual testing. So what this talk is about is I actually built a tool within Burp to help web application pen testers or vuln assessors do their work manually in a much more efficient way. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But start things off, I just wanted to give a couple of contributions. I wouldn't be speaking up here if it weren't for these people, the motley crew at BugCrowd. In particular, my boss, Jason Haddix, who originally came up with the idea for this tool and this talk. Ryan Black and Fatih Egbatan, who helped do the testing as well as write some of the code as well. And the Sec engineering and Sec ops teams at BugCrowd as well for taking a look at the tool and doing some testing. I wanted to give shout outs to all the bug hunters, pen testers, and code analysis people out there. As if you contributed to doing any submissions on BugCrowd, a lot of that data did make it into this tool. And Burp Suite fans, everyone's a fan of Burp Suite. Everyone uses it for their web application assessments, and the GitHub contributors. So the last time I talked about Hunt at DEF CON and Black Hat, it's been pretty popular. I've gotten a couple of pull requests, so shout outs to the GitHub contributors as well. So let's talk about the current problems we're facing in the web application space when it comes to manual testing. So kind of the first thing is that you'll notice with a lot of web applications these days is that there are increasingly large and complicated web applications that need manual testing. So what am I talking about? If you go on websites like Amazon or any of those big e-commerce websites, you'll know that they're huge. They have a lot of dynamic content, whether it's JavaScript, HTML5, stuff like that. There's going to be a lot of dynamic parameters, hundreds and hundreds of parameters. And as a manual tester, how do you kind of tackle that, right? It's going to be hard to just do manual testing with the sheer amount of injectable entry points that are on these applications. Next thing is, application assessment training lacks tribal knowledge of vulnerability location. What do I mean by this? So if you are a brand new web application pen tester, generally, due to experience, you're not going to know where to look, and it's kind of hard to know where to look if you don't have the experience, and you need to kind of build up that experience to know where to look, right? So it's kind of a chicken and egg problem, but that's something that's severely hindering a lot of the testers today. And the third is that there's really no in-tool workflow for web hacking methodologies. So a lot of the tools that we're working with today, we're going to have to use several tools just to do our testing and then do our reporting. Why can't we have both, right? So what are the current solutions? What are the current solutions for for those problems today? Number one, hackers who can eyeball and effectively find security bugs. I don't need to tell you guys that there is a severe shortage in finding a good pen tester. I'm preaching to the crowd here. So really, they may or may not have a methodology. It could be some kind of YOLO swag god, and you just go at an application and find vulnerabilities and not use a methodology. But it's important to use a methodology when you're doing your testing. Definitely has accrued tribal knowledge. Again, that just comes with experience, and it kind of puts all the new pen testers at a disadvantage because they just don't have that experience. or someone who bug hunts or does consultant work already. And again, it just goes back to that, that problem of, we have a shortage in the industry. Another current solution that we have is using a dynamic scanner. So if you're not using a dynamic scanner, you probably should, but a lot of companies and a lot of testers do use dynamic scanners. But there are some cases where it doesn't really help with manual testing. There's limited test cases in terms of fuzzing the parameters. They're usually already set. The injections or payloads are already set. It's cost prohibitive. If you're using a good dynamic scanner, you're probably paying thousands of dollars for it. There's limited detection cases as well, at least in terms of kind of dynamic pages or error pages. It'll tell you that there's an error page, but it won't give you context as to what that error page means. That's something for a manual pen tester to actually look at to know what just happened there on that error. And again, complex sites are hard in terms of authentication. A lot of scanners have difficulty with kind of logging into web applications these days. I mean, they're pretty good now, but they're not 100%. So a manual tester should still go through the web application manually. And that's where Hunt comes in. So we kind of took all of those problems and we kind of wrote a tool to solve them. So what does Hunt actually do? It gathers all the tribal knowledge into passive alerts that will tell you, hey, you should probably take a look at this certain area of the web application based on the parameter, because I know it to be vulnerable from what I've seen from the data set. And I also put in a methodology within Burp itself. So if you're a pen tester and you're going through a methodology, you can actually do all of that within Burp. Burp doesn't have that out of the box. So that's something that I wanted to build in there because, context switching is kind of hard when it comes to doing your reporting. You have to copy and paste everywhere, and it gets really messy really fast. And we also put in manual testing references within Burp as well. So again, that tribal knowledge, it's going to help out new pen testers. Say that they're, SQL injection, you found SQL injection, but you don't really know how to exploit it. We put in, links to different references that you can go to help you out in, doing your pen testing, whether it's, SQL injection or something else like server-side request forgery. So this talk is pretty much split into two different parts, and there's two different parts of the tool. The first is going to be the scanner portion, and here's a little comic from XKCD. It's like, well, we have all this data, we should write some algorithms around it, but you find out that it's a lot harder than that. So let's take a look at the tribal knowledge piece, the bug location. Where do those bugs actually come from? So we actually took data from BugCrowd from over 600 bug bounty programs, and that equates to about 2 web targets per program on average. So a target would be the different subdomains within the domain, or different domains that are in scope for that particular program or company, right? And within that, there's about 15 parameters per target on average that we found to be vulnerable on those bounties. So what does that mean? So we took 600 times 2 times 15, and we saw about 18,000 parameters, and that's the data set that we're working from to see where all of the bug locations are based on parameters. So let's talk about vulnerability locations. So we took those 18,000 parameters, we reduced them down to just the parameters with the actual vulnerabilities on them. We reduced it down even further to just critical and high severity bugs. So these are the bugs that are really, SQL injection, remote code execution, stuff like that, that are really, really critical to find. And, again, these aren't the things that dynamic scanners can find. This is something that, a real live pen tester or web application vulnerability tester will find. So, and we wanted to make it easy. we also sorted it down by recurring instances. So, parameter names generally came up very, very frequently that we saw. And, things like ID, if you're a seasoned pen tester, you'll know that that's probably going to be interacting with the database, and probably you can do SQL injection there. So we saw a lot of that in our data set. We also reviewed the top 100 parameters for possible permutations manually with or with regex. What we mean by that is sometimes we saw that parameter names had, so let's take the example of ID again. Sometimes it would be at the beginning of the parameter name, sometimes it would be at the end of the parameter name, sometimes it'd be somewhere in the middle. So we saw a lot of that occurring as well. And then we also added manual ancillary data, stuff from what we've seen from doing, hundreds and hundreds of pen tests. We've taken from lists like FuzzDB and SecList. If you guys haven't heard of those, definitely check those out. And they're cool projects. Let's go back and kind of talk about, the composition of what a URL looks like. So just very simply, it's composed of a protocol, a subdomain, a domain, which is the domain name itself, plus the top level domain, and then there might be a file or resource there at the end of the URL, but the juicy piece there in red is going to be the parameter and the parameter value. That's what we took from our data set, and that's going to be important for this tool. So if you're a seasoned pen tester, or even you've seen quite a bit of stuff like ID, you already know what to do. So this is literally me when I see ID equals. I just sprinkle all those single ticks just to see if I can pop a SQL injection in there. Let's actually take a look at the GUI for the scanner itself. So you'll notice that there's a scanner window. It's called Hunt Scanner, and you'll see all the different pieces there. On the left side, there's the actual vulnerability classes, and then all of the different parameters from our data set. And if you actually click into one of the parameters themselves, it'll open up that table, and you can see all of the parameters. And then down here, you can drill down to the request and response for each of the things that were found by the scanner itself. And then, as we were saying before, with the tribal knowledge, you can see that there's an advisory. So if there's a SQL injection on ID, it'll tell you that here's the location where I found the potential vulnerability. Hunt located it. Maybe it's something that you might want to look at. Again, this is not an automated thing. It'll help out in the efficiency of manual pen testers so that they can be much faster at being able to find those critical vulnerabilities. And then you see there at the bottom, it'll have all of the links to the different resources. I myself like using PentestMonkey when I have to do a SQL injection. So I generally look at that when I'm looking at, say if it's a MySQL or Postgres or stuff like that. So now let's talk about the bug location by bug and vulnerability class. So what do I mean by this? We have the data set here, and it's broken down by the vulnerability class and then the different parameters. So SQL injection, again, you'll notice that a lot of what we saw in our data set was that a lot of the parameters were ID, select, query, update. So really grammar that was indicative of kind of talking to a database. And when you look at this slide, it's like, well, duh, of course I'm going to inject on those, but it's hard for a new pen tester to actually be able to know that off the bat without having all of that knowledge ahead of time, and that's what we're trying to solve here. Next vulnerability class, file includes. So this includes both remote and local file includes, as well as directory indexing. A lot of the parameters had to do with kind of both vulnerability classes. You'll see there, file, location, locale, path. Again, it's very simple stuff. And these are the parameters that a lot of our bug hunters actually did find really juicy vulnerabilities and did get paid out a lot of money on. So, and we're offering all that data here. So, it's again, it's kind of, it looks obvious, but at the same time, until you get all the data together, it's just like, oh wow, of course. Why didn't I see that before? Next thing here is server-side request forgery. So you'll notice some of the fire emojis here, and this is actually because this is the most critical bug on the platform that has increased in the last couple of months and quarters, even years. And definitely look for this bug if you're out there doing your vuln assessments or pen tests. So a lot of the parameters you'll see they actually mimic kind of open redirect vulnerabilities, things like destination, dest for destination, redirect, URI, path. So when you see those kinds of open redirect parameters, you should try doing server-side request forgery on those. Next thing is the OS command injection, remote code execution. Obviously, this is very critical, and a lot of the parameters that we saw were like daemon, upload, directory, execute, so stuff like that. Usually indicative of OS command injection or remote code execution on those. Insecure direct object reference. So things like ID. So ID comes up actually pretty frequently from our data set. However, they're on multiple vulnerability classes, and within the tool itself, it'll separate it by vulnerability class and by ID. So if the scanner finds that you're going through a web application that has the parameter ID, it'll put it in all those different places so that you can go and check for all the different vulnerabilities associated with that parameter name. And again, ID, user, account, stuff that you can actually do and change in terms of horizontal privilege level escalation, getting to other people's accounts or email, stuff like that. Here's an interesting one, server-side template injection, relatively new vulnerability class compared to the classics like SQL injection. If you see the parameter name template, content ID again, preview, these are usually going to come up with server-side template injection, some kind of templating engine on the back end, whether it's PHP, Python, stuff like that. It'll end up using these parameter names. And just for funsies, we threw in some debug and logic parameters. And I see these quite often on a lot of the web applications that I've done testing on it over the years and currently. So you'll see, access, admin, debug, edit. And it's funny because usually these parameters are going to present themselves as, access equals false. What if I make it true? So sometimes you kind of don't think of that right away, or again, if you're a new pen tester, you wouldn't know to set a parameter name from false to true just to see kind of what happens. And that's what we took from all of the actual debug and logic parameters, and it could yield some pretty good authentication or authorization bypasses within web applications. So what does the Hunt Scanner implementation look like in terms of the code? So I used a lot of the burp API and actually wrote this in Python or Jython. And you can see here I use a couple of APIs that burp exposes, burp extender, extension listener, scanner check, iTab, and iText editor. But really, this is where all the action happens. We're doing a passive scan on all of the content that burp is going through in terms of what's going through the proxy when you're doing your testing. So it's not an active scan, it's a passive scan, and actually we don't show all of the info within the passive scanner window because we didn't want to kind of dirty up your current workflow of burp. It would just end up with a lot of kind of content on the passive scanner is going to be hard to parse, so we actually made another window for this tool so that it'll be easier to actually look at from a pen test perspective, in case you use the passive scanner a lot. So let's do a live demo. So I am tempting the demo gods right now. This is definitely going to work. I totally don't do live demos for a living. All right. So here's the scanner window. Let's say, I'm testing on, OWASP, AppSecUSA.org. And let's say, very contrived example. Let's say I found, a parameter name called ID. And again, that's a parameter that's usually vulnerable to things like SQL injection and other vulnerabilities. So let's load that up. And obviously, when you're doing a real pen test, it's not going to be like this. It'll just pick the scanner will just pick it up passively as you're crawling through your web application. But you can see here, it showed up in the window. Maybe you should check SQL injection. Maybe you should check server-side template injection, insecure direct object reference. They all have the parameter ID. But let's look at SQL injection, for example, here. You'll see that once you actually click this menu, it'll show up here, and it'll tell you what the host, the parameter ID, because it could be that the parameter name is ID, or it's some kind of like ID underscore user, user underscore ID, stuff like that. It'll show up there, so you'll know which parameter you're actually looking to test, and then the path that we found it on. Again, here's that advisory window. You can see the request and response from Burp itself. Someone had actually written this as a pull request and is still working on it, but you're going to be able to actually load and save results that you found here on the scanner window. So if you need to, go do something else, or you're done for work with the day and you want to kind of shut everything down, you can load all of this back up and get started again, the next day when you're doing your testing. But to help out in kind of the workflow of knowing what you've tested, you can actually do this here. It's supposed to be a checkbox, but sometimes Java Swing doesn't want to play nicely. But if you click this on and off, you'll notice on the side, it means that you've actually checked that parameter. There might be more parameters that you need to be testing, but this is to keep track of what you've actually tested and what you haven't tested. So so you're not doubling up on all the work. And there's a lot of deduplication on the tool on the back end. So if the tool thinks that, oh, I've already seen this parameter before, then it's not going to include it in this window. So there's deduplication happening as well. So it's not showing up ID 100 times on here, and then you have to click it every time and say, yeah, I've already checked it. So that was the scanner window itself. So let's talk about the methodology window. So again, we wanted to build out kind of a methodology within Burp that testers can use so that they can keep track of their work, as well as be able to give this at the end of the report, because the test isn't over until you hand in that report. And it's important to get that report right, because someone's going to hunt you down if that report doesn't look good, or you don't have the right things on it. Let's take a step back and talk about kind of the methodologies that we all use as pen testers and as vulnerability assessors. So since we're here at AppSecUSA, obviously a lot of us probably use the OWASP testing guide. Some of us use the Web Application Hacker's Handbook, a definite classic. If you go through it, I forget which chapter it is, but it tells you kind of a methodology that you should kind of look at when you're doing your web application pen test. And we actually included that as one of the methodologies within the tool itself. Or you might be compelled by some kind of body like HIPAA or PCI to do your methodologies. And if you're dealing with any kind of healthcare data, or dealing with any kind of payment card data, you know you have to go through these methodologies in order to get that passed. So, and really, why do we do this as pen testers? It's to prove the work, right? It's like when you're in your math class when you're a kid, you know, you have long division and all you have is the number on there and the teacher's like, where's the work? You can't get credit for this if you don't have the work. It's the same thing for, you know, a pen test. If you don't have the report at the end and you say you found all these vulnerabilities, really you've proven nothing, right? And you need to be able to actually have that report to send off to whoever is actually looking for it. And we wanted to make it easy for the pen tester to be able to do that with these methodologies built into the tool that they're already actually doing their work in. So what does this look like within Burp? So here on the proxy window, you can actually do a right click and then you'll see kind of an entry there. It says send to Hunt methodology. And depending on how the methodology looks like, you can send it to various places within that methodology. This one is built on the different functionalities of a web application. So, you know, maybe I'll send this one to the account and I think it's SQL injection, or I've already tested it and I know it to be vulnerable to SQL injection. So I want to send that request and response pair to the Hunt methodology section for SQL injection. And that description. So again, that tribal knowledge. So when you're doing your testing and you know you're new to this, you know you're going to say, what should I do for here? And you know, sometimes you need to check all the parameters that present themselves as, you know, insert, delete, or update statements in terms of SQL injection for, you know, some kind of account functionality. Again, we want to make it easy for new pen testers to get started, hit the floor running much faster than they would if, you know, they would have to start from scratch. I know when I first started, it was pretty difficult for me, you know, going through the web application Hacker's Handbook and really having nowhere to start. So hopefully this will be helpful to all the new pen testers. There's support for multiple requests and responses here. So you can see in this bugs tab, you can have multiple requests and responses based on what you found during your testing. And I kind of just want to point out, you see that little X right there to close that tab? Just as a side note, that took me so long to do. Java Swing is driving me insane. That was probably harder to do than putting all of this together. And you know, there's also resources. So what do I do once I've actually found a SQL injection, or I think I found a SQL injection? I'm going to go to Pentest Monkey, or I'm going to go to, you know, my favorite resource, or if there's a blog post that I just saw on, you know, RNetSec or something, and it has to do with, you know, a vulnerability that I'm looking at, I'm going to stick it here into the resources tab. And what kind of pen tester doesn't take good notes, right? So we also put a note-taking kind of application on here, so you can keep notes in terms of the vulnerabilities that you found, so that, you know, maybe you want to do testing later. If it's SQL, if I can't get it to pop, I'll use SQL Map. Or, you know, if I'm a real noob, which I am, I'll go ask Jason Haddix for help because he's super good at, you know, being a pen tester and doing all that. I'll go to him and be like, hey bro, can you like help me out? I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And to kind of, you know, you could put a lot of entries in here like the notes and the resources, but you might ask yourself, you know, how do you keep track of that? You can actually save and load JSON files. So kind of the configuration files are written in JSON, so it's very easy to actually edit yourself, and that's kind of a lot of what we wanted to accomplish here. Not only did we want to make it easy and efficient for pen testers, we also wanted to make it extensible for you guys, so that, you know, if you have your own kind of testing methodologies or you wanted to add your own stuff, we wanted to make it easy for you guys to actually be able to do that. And I'll go through that in just a moment here. But it looks like, let's see here. This is what the methodology implementation looks like. We used the APIs, you know, extension state listener, context menu factory to make that right click, and the I tab to actually make the window. But it all comes down to this, you know, create menu items, and on the back end. So it's going to actually make that right-click context menu so that you can send all of those request and response pairs to the tool itself. And I dare tempt fate again with another live demo. So let's go for 2 for 2 here. So here's the methodology window. The default one that we wrote into Hunt breaks it down by functionality and by the functionality of any kind of web application. The account registration, things you would typically find on any kind of web application you're doing your pen test on. We kind of wrote that kind of methodology there. So let's say that, again, going back to that ID parameter, let's say I send this to repeater, and I throw a tick, and I was able to get a SQL injection. What I'll do is I'll actually right-click here, send to Hunt methodology. Let's say I found it on the account functionality. I'll send it here. It goes into SQL injection. So within Hunt itself, I'll go into account, SQL injection, and it'll end up here on bugs. And this is going to keep track of all of your work. So if you've already popped that SQL injection, you'll have the request and response, and it'll be very easy to prove that, yes, you did find that SQL injection there. And here's the proof because I have the request and response bodies that I used in my testing. So, and that'll go all into your report instead of you having to go back and forth, do context switching, copy and paste here, switch to a new window. That gets very tiring very quickly. And that'll all end up in the JSON file. So if you want to write kind of whatever reporting tool that you're using, if you want to script it out, have it go into the reporting tool, boom, it'll make your reporting so much easier. And then you can see here, you can put in resources. You can actually preload them within the JSON file itself. And then, any kind of note taking you want to do because, maybe you can't get the vulnerability to pop. Maybe you want to look at it later. Maybe you want to send it to a senior pen tester to take a look at, or someone who's much more experienced than you about any kind of vulnerability. You can just pass them the JSON file. They can load it within their own instance of Burp, and then boom, they'll have your instance of what you were working on. So it makes it very, very easy and very, very fast.
Why did you have to send it to Hunt rather than Hunt detecting it on its own?
It's hard to detect it on its own. Again, this is a manual process, not so much kind of automated. So as a manual tester, you know what you're testing and what you found. Maybe a scanner can't do that. So that kind of thing is very hard to automate.
But there is a passive scanner running inside Hunt, right?
Yes, but it's not always vulnerable. So you don't want to clutter up all of your work on things that might not be a vulnerability. So let's talk about the plugin installation itself. So again, this is a Burp extension, so it's very, very easy to actually get up and running. Like I said before, I wrote this in Python because I'm crazy, and I took a lot of Java Swing stuff and kind of translated it in Python, and I'm never doing that again. But here's the installation. You would go and download the standalone Jython jar file, and you will load it up here in Burp, go to Extender, and then Options, and then within Python environment, you set that as your jar so that Burp knows where exactly to look, and it's going to use that jar to build this and run this plugin. So the actual plugin installation itself, you would go here in the extensions. You would click Add on the Burp extensions, and then you would click Python for the extension type because it's .py, and then you would select it within the file selector and then load it into Burp, and you're off and running. But before you do any kind of testing, it's also important to set your target scope. So if you're doing any kind of pen test, you're going to know that you have to stay within scope. If you don't, you're kind of breaking the rules, right? And You would do this by going into the target scope area, the target window, and you go in scope. And I actually didn't know this until recently, that you could just put a string in here with just, the name. I was used to actually putting hosts on there, but I found out that you can put this in here, and that's pretty awesome. So anything with the name, AppSecUSA within the host name itself, it'll pick up based on the target. And then you would set the passive scanner scope. Again, the passive scanner is very, very noisy, and we didn't want to clutter it up, so make sure to use the suite scope here so it'll only pick up what you're supposed to be looking for and not all of the random Google requests that might happen or third-party requests that might happen on a website. And then a lot of people don't know this, but I use this a lot for my bug hunting, and this is great for actually finding a lot of host names through Burp. Just click, spider selected items, and you would be surprised at how many things that you could find just by spidering all of the hosts that you're supposed to be actually doing your pen test on, and you can uncover a lot more host names to do testing. And then once you've actually done that a couple times, run the passive scanner if it hasn't run already. You just want to double check it and do all that. Run the passive scanner, and then all the results will end up in the Hunt scanner window. So let's talk about extensibility again. Again, we wanted to give you guys the building blocks to be able to do your testing the way you want to do it, not just the way we do it. So what does that mean? In terms of the scanner extensibility, it all comes down to that JSON file. So this is kind of what an issue looks like from the JSON file. And let's say that you wanted to just add another parameter on OS command injection. You might be like, JP, you're a moron. You don't know what you're talking about. This vulnerable parameter here is actually vulnerable, and you didn't include that in your data set. That's fine. You can add that into your own JSON file, and then you will find that whenever you're doing your testing. So we wanted to make that, again, very, very easy to do. On the methodology side of the extensibility, all you need to do is add new functionality here. Just as long as you follow the actual schema, the tool will build it out in those menus that you saw earlier, those tables, and everything will be fine. If it doesn't, then the schema is obviously wrong. And it's very easy to find out whether you did it right or not. And let's go for 3 on the live demos. So, and this one is for kind of how the workflow would be if you wanted to add something dynamically to the parameters. So let's say that I already added it here, but let's say that you have let's change this to OWASP 2017. And I added it on insecure direct object reference here. So let me reload the scanner itself. And this will reload the JSON file into your scanner, so it will pick it up. So let's look at it in the scanner window, insecure direct object reference. Boom, right there, OWASP 2017. Let's say we found it on the actual website, 2017, as a parameter. Obviously, it's not a vulnerable parameter, but you might have a vulnerable parameter that's not within the Hunt data set, and you can just add that very easily. Let's say it found it, for example's sake. Boom, right there. Shows the parameter name, where it found it. Then I'll have the request response, and then you can send it to repeater, intruder, so you can do more work on it. But it did find it. And let's say that it wasn't vulnerable, so I'll check that, and it closes it off. So there's 0 to check for this parameter. You can move on with your work and check all the other stuff. Now let's look at the extensibility of the actual methodology. And let's add another kind of vulnerability class here on our tests for authentication. Let's call it a swag bypass. That's going to be a new OWASP top 10 vulnerability class right there, swag bypass. Let's say it made it into OWASP top 10 this year. Let's reload the actual Hunt methodology. Oops. goes here. Look at the functionality. What was it? It was, where did I put that? Authentication. Boom, right there. And then, you can get on with your work. So let's talk about the future of, kind of Hunt. We want to put more built-in methodologies, definitely stuff like OWASP, PCI, HIPAA, CREST, P-test, stuff like that. If you want to contribute to the project, just make a JSON file with all of the testing methodologies, and then it'll be available for the rest of the community. So that would be great if a lot of people can do that. Maybe port these features to Zap. I love OWASP. So if you use Zap and you want to get all of this stuff in Zap, maybe you want to port it in Zap. We also want to add more scanner checks as well as vulnerability classes. Right now, we just put in all of the the critical stuff, but maybe you want to get into the other vulnerability classes if you haven't seen it here already. We want to add those as well as time goes on. Add more resources, obviously. People are finding new attacks or new ways to bypass things, so we want to add good resources for new pen testers to read so that they get all of that experience right away without having to spend years and years and years pen testing hundreds and hundreds of applications just to get the same kind of experience. Dynamic JSON structure support. Right now it's very, the JSON structure is very tight, so if you don't follow the structure properly, it's not going to build the tool. We want to make this be able to be much more dynamic so that it works into your guys' workflow much more easier. Maybe you might not go by functionality. You want to go down deeper levels, and currently it only supports a couple of levels down on the table. We want to make it more dynamic. Maybe a more perfect GUI, but it's Java Swing. You can only do so much, right? REST support, that's currently not built in. We're only looking at parameters. So a lot of apps these days are using REST, so we want to be able to test for things that we see on the URL for REST instead of just the parameters, resource file name analysis instead of just parameters, alerts on content types, XML, JSON, because vulnerabilities like XXE, if you'll know it's there if the content type is JSON or XML, you might be able to, change the content type. So a lot of it, we want to alert on that to make sure that, testers are looking at that. And probably most importantly that I see a lot of new testers kind of ignore is response analysis alerts. What do I mean by that? The error pages that you get based on the injections that you do. Sometimes, you might get like some kind of error page that's not a 404. That just means that you need to dig deeper. Don't stop there. Keep going. That error is there because the application doesn't want to let you get to something, so you want to dig in deeper. So for a lot of you new pen testers, definitely look into the errors that you're seeing when you're doing your testing.